halfway through the 2007 ABSA Off-Road Championship Series, and here's our look back at the first 4 races, with exactly that many still to go to decide whether Class Crowns will rest for a year. And the Off-Road Series has been a fantastic development for Darling in the Western Cape. Situated approximately 120 km up the M7 from Cape Town to the west coast, this haven, made famous by comedian Pieter Dirk Uys and his alter ego Evita Besaidnout, hosted the circus for the 2nd year running, and the little town and surrounds has never quite been the same since. Darling in the Western Cape was the scene for the start then of national series of 8 races, but the West Coast is always a true test, not only for the fact that it's the first of the season, but because somehow it always ends up being bone dry and dusty as the moon's surface. The testing had been done, the new liveries had been unveiled, the teams were assembled and ready to do battle, and it was a true test for each one of the 64 entries. The men who had the fastest early times were Gary Bertold and Henry Costain, who changed their Atlas Copco's canary yellow livery to a turquoise blue and inserted a new gearbox, but the rest stayed exactly the same. They were still as quick as the proverbial racing snake. However, the motorbike lads let it all hang out. The prologue affords you a relatively dust-free ride if you clock a time fast enough not to get left behind slower traffic. Cox and co-driver Henny Tersteger were determined. Their back 3.5 litre sounded in fine voice. In the SP class, there was the usual serious scrap. No mercy asked or given, and defending national champ Hannes Grobler and Francois Jordan poured everything into it to try to take the top spot for the production vehicles. The proudly South African Nissan Navara was going like a Boeing, and their teammates Duncan Voss and Ralph Pitchford, a good start for them was imperative. Mark Renier and Chris Birkin had a very encouraging season together last year and were keen to build on that this time round. The Castrol Toyota team would have been pleased, as they were just seconds off the pace. The route featured several long straights and then some truly twisty parts, which tested man and machine. 3 laps of about 130 km each, and Cox opened up the taps early on the straights, while father and son Ryan and Nick Harper were making their big Atlas Copco porters sing along. Well into the first loop, and Naeem Mosaji and Rayan Bodjana and the TTR Racing Jimco seemed to have things running nicely. They were 5th in class. Just behind them, clocking some very competitive intermediate times, it was Shamir Varayawa and his nav Siegfried Rousseau in the Total Motorsport Porter. They logged a 1 hour 25-minute timing for Loop 1. Looking slightly worse for wear, it was Clint Gibson and Mike Brown's absolute bat, with the front right wheel limping ever so slightly. For Nissan's Norwegian import Ivar Tollefson and the Nissan Navara, the dry, dusty conditions took some getting used to, but he and co-driver Quinn Evans were getting the hang of it. Glenn Gibson and Mark Whitehurst in their absolute ace-co Nissan were 30th overall, going well and leading Class S. Hutchison, the 05 champion, was picking up where he'd left off and was in no mood to slow things down. While Alfie Cox had started 39 seconds behind his teammate on day 1 after the prologue, but he was on his way to clocking the fastest time for Loop 1, a 1 hour and 23-minute effort. But Grobler and Jordan themselves were just a few ticks off the clock off the pace, and in Darling, it's not often that the production cars keep pace with the space frame vehicles. The Atlas Copco, Bertold and Costain had a problem virtually from the start, and they dropped out, but their teammates, the Harpers, were flying up the order in their bat. Varayawa and Rousseau were battling their car without back brakes, but it did not seem to slow them down much at all. With Voss and Pitchford racing like they always do, an aggressive mix of caution and speed. While lap 2 also meant a meaningful move from Mark Ronier and Chris Birkin, who despite hitting barbed wire and losing time with a puncture, were right in the thick of things. Brandon Harkis, who won here in a single special last year, and his co Jean Moore were feeling their way in their new car, a Ford Ranger SP, while Manfred Schroeder and his co Ward Huxtable were piloting the absolute Barnewall Ranger to 2 very consistent laps. For the national SP champions, Ford's Neil Woolridge and Kenny Scholthammer, there wasn't much joy as they were strangely off the pace and had to call it a day. Karl-Heinz Sulwalt and Mannekes Halberg were in superb form in their Sulwalt Transport Zarko and blazed into the top 10, overtaking 35 cars in the process. While Naeem Mosaji and Rehan Bodjana and the TTR Racing Jimco had just dropped 2 places down to 11th, but still going well. Nandus Alberts and Colin Hunter kept the Rapsabat's nose pointed in the right direction quickly enough all day, and they were 12th overall in 7th in Class A. While Gary Gillingham and Peter van Vieren in the Kopenhagen Hotel Bat had overtaken several teams, they were up from 23rd and into the top 15, with the newcomers of 06 father and son, Jan and Hendrik Krij, just doing what they do so well, keeping it going and leading Class B. However, Class B second places Johan and Etienne Besaidnout in the Edenko Bat had picked up 2 spots to put the pressure on the leaders, with Rokon CO Peter Ruthven and Johan Boshoff in the Rokon Bat making up 15 places, up from 31st. Birthday boy Gareth Bork and brother Robert were having a fun time in the Super Bay Bat, while Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnorst had to settle for 3rd in their Team Barberspan Castrol Toyota, but were pretty pleased with a good drive. With Century Properties Developments Nissan, Mark Corbett and Rudy Balzar 1 place further back in the SP class. And just nudging into the top 20, the Besaidnoits were smiling from ear to ear in the Edenko Bat. But whatever the case may have been, the Western Cape dust was everywhere. Just ask Richard Schilling and Chris Davies, who were the only Class S car left in the race. And in Class D, it was the brothers Duplessis, Yuri and Andre, who took line honours by more than 10 minutes. By now, more than 30% of the entrants were forced to call it a day. Jannie Visser and Joks Leroux were determined to again do their bit for Toyota, and they did. They were leading Class E by almost half an hour, with Labuskaghni and Gerber second and 25th overall, a solid drive by the Raysonics team. Giel Nel and Sandra Labuskaghni were 1 place further back, but were 4th in Class B, racking up the points. But there would be a heartbreak for the brothers Gary and Mark White, who had a surprise visit from a puncher just after this, and it dropped them down the order again after a good drive. Jack Peckham and Lucio Santoro were 2nd in Class E and 28th overall in the Ford Ranger 2-litre. With Cliff and Louis Weifeld in their Bosel Toyota Hilux 3rd in Class D and happy to get to the finish after several small problems. And in the Toyota of Brian Martin and Oki Fourie, there was jubilation as they took 3rd in Class E. But at the finish line, one of the first of 8 races in the 07 ABSA Off-Road Championships, it was Motorite's Evan Hutchison and Akim Bergman who took the line honours in 4 hours and 26 minutes. And in the production car class, there was just no one who could pass a flying Nissan Navara in the hands of 3-time champion Hannes Grobler, who made it 2 for 2 in Darling. Hutchison and Bergman were good as gold, while the Motorite crew made it a double whammy when Cox and Terstegen nabbed 2nd.